Here's the truth about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A Comprehensive History by Ben Shapiro. Let's go. Oh.
Alrighty, so today we're going to talk about the
He's so
history
loud.
of the Israeli-Palestinian Arab conflict. In order to discuss that history, we have to go back in time, like way, way back in time. First, this particular video is sponsored by our friends over at ExpressVPN.
Yeah.
The Jewish homeland has always been the dream in Israel. Okay, to understand how tiny this slot of land is, you kind of have to look at this map. Okay, so this tiny area right here covers Israel and actually some other countries. Okay, the entire map, if you were to zoom out and take a look at the Arab world, what you would see is this enormous swath of the globe, and then you would see like this tiny pinprick about half the size of New Jersey, and that constitutes
It's always New Jersey. They always compare it to New Jersey. I guess it's just that's the one that fits exactly the in terms of size. Yeah.
modern day Israel. It's a very, very small plot of land. And if you were to look at this area, like the narrowest part of the land is currently constituted, you'd be looking at about 9 miles wide right here. The Jewish history with regard to the land of Israel begins approximately 1300 BCE, before the birth of Christ. Moses leaves Egypt somewhere around 1300 BCE. There are various sort of attempts to date this. A little bit later in the century, Joshua enters the land. He crosses the Jordan River, right? So the Jewish people go out here, they pass through the Red Sea, they end up wandering around in the desert, and then they enter the land of Canaan, right, which is this whole area, by about 1000 BC.
See, I don't think this is the claim I hear, but I'm pretty sure this idea that Jews came from, like there were Jews in Egypt and went up to Israel. I'm pretty sure this is like the only source for this is the Bible. I'm pretty sure this is like a really unreliable fucking statement. So that's good. Okay. I guess no one really cares about the ancient history, so yeah. Wow. Ben Shapiro. Okay, good start. 1 minute in. Okay.
The kingdom of David is established. Jerusalem is the capital, right? This is the first that Jerusalem matters sort of in world history. Remember, still 1,000 years before Christ. By 957 BCE, the first temple of Solomon is built. It is built in Jerusalem. Now remember, this is still a good 1,600 years before the rise of Islam.
Isn't the Bible a historical document? It's not a very reliable one if it's the only source for a claim. You want to confirm things in the Bible from archaeology and other such things.
There's a lot of infighting among the Jews. There's a separation between the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. Those are two separate kingdoms. And you end up with ancient maps that look sort of like this, right? This ancient map is the kingdom of Israel, which was 10 of the tribes. And then you have the kingdom of Judah, which is the one that was governed by the Davidic line. The first exile that happens to
you notice that Gaza did become part of the kingdom of Israel for a brief period, but it generally wasn't. I think that's why I wonder how much that informs Israeli policy. Like, I think even the Talmud doesn't put Gaza as part of the considered as part of Israel, even though they have been there and there has been a Jewish presence there. But yeah, I wonder how much that explains their actions there.
Jews happens in 722 BCE when the Assyrians rush in from the north. You can see the Assyrian Empire at the top of this map. They rush in from the north. Then there's another exile that takes place in 586 BCE. This is the Babylonian exile. So from way the hell out here on this map, the Babylonians come in, they conquer the land, and they destroy the first temple. In 515 BCE, there's this great return from Babylonia, and the second temple is built. In 63 BCE, the Romans take over. So Pompey, at that point, not the emperor, but just a general, takes over the area, and Judea becomes a vassal state. And Judea remains a vassal state of the Roman Empire, basically through the end of an independent Jewish kingdom. It's called Judea at this point. It is not called Israel. 70 CE is the destruction of Jerusalem. There's a Jewish revolt against the Roman government because of bad administrative practices and because of infighting and because of a crackdown on religious practice, and Jerusalem is destroyed. And not only is Jerusalem destroyed, the second temple is destroyed at the time as well. 130 to 136 CE, there is a massive revolt by the Jews under a general named Simon Bar Kokhba.
I wonder if he's going to try to make the claim that they renamed it to Palestine to shit on the Jews. I wonder.
The Bar Kokhba revolt was extremely damaging to the Roman Empire. They had to expend extraordinary resources in order to stop the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is why it was almost an independent kingdom for a solid 4 or 5 years there. They renamed the area Palestine as an insult to the Jews. That's why it was named Palestine.
See, I've heard this, but I don't think there's actually a direct source for this happening, because it seems to be the case that there were people calling this area Syria or Palestina or Cyprus. Like, I think people were calling it that beforehand. Like, they definitely. I think this is Herodotus, who I think was way before. I think he was BC as far as I remember. Yeah, but definitely before Bar Kokhba. But he referred to it as the whole of Phoenicia and that part of Syria, which is called Palestine, because it was like Syria, Palestina was this kind of area around here. So I don't know how, because the fact that there's still contention over it is kind of weird, but I guess people who are pro-Israel just like it because it's a talking point, like, oh, Palestine's a colonial name, right? Yeah. I think under the Romans you have this, right? Like Syria, Palestina. But I feel like the word Palestine is derived from the Philistines. I know that, who were there way long ago. They were there like 1000 something BC. But I know that's not settled history as far as I know.
So when people say historic Palestine, understand.
Yeah, 400 BC, and Bar Kokhba is what, like 100 AD? Like, yeah, way before Rome. Yeah.
That the existence of Palestine was meant as a name, as an insult to the Jews, who were considered the historic inhabitants of the land, and it is first used in 136 CE, a solid 1,200 years after the Jews.
See, that's not true, is it? 136 CE. Yeah, that's not true, is it? Because, oh, where did I put it? Did I lose it already? No. Yeah, because this is Herodotus, who was BC. I'm almost sure. Wait, hang on. Don't be stupid, Loner Box, okay? I don't know that much about this part of history. 484 BC. All quotes from Herodotus. Yeah. Which is called Palestine. So, yeah, okay. Damn.
First to enter the land at a minimum. Now, finally, we get to the founding of Islam. So Islam finally is founded around the 7th century CE. Arabs take over this land in about 636 CE. In 1099, the Crusaders decide that they are going to take back the land. And from 1099 to 1291, the Crusaders are fighting battles with the Islamic world and establish rule inside Jerusalem and inside Israel. In 1291, the Crusaders are defeated, and a Muslim group called the Mamluks take over. They rule for a couple of hundred years. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire, another Muslim empire, takes over the entire area. Now, understand, since the destruction of the Kingdom of Judea, there has not been a single independent state called Palestine set up anytime in here. It has always just been a territory of an outlying empire, and pretty sparsely populated, actually, because there wasn't a lot there, as it turns out. The Ottoman Empire, this entire time from 1517 to 1918, till the end of World War I, during that time...
I've never understood this argument that because there was no state, that still shouldn't mean the people who lived there didn't have rights, but... Yeah.
They really didn't want Jews settling in the land, and so they had barred Jewish land purchase. You actually could not buy land in this area if you were Jewish. Jews started to make sort of backdoor deals with local Arabs to buy their land, and so you start seeing Jews trying to escape various places from which they've been exiled for, thousands of years, back to the Holy Land. There's a constant Jewish presence here. Throughout all of these exiles, there's never no presence of Jews in, for example, Hebron or in Jerusalem or in various areas of the Holy Land. But the first major aliyah, which is termed the aliyah in Hebrew, that means to go up, right? Because there's a spiritual rising that takes place when you go to the Holy Land. The first aliyah is around 1882. It's late 19th century, and it's mostly Russians attempting to escape pogroms that are happening in Russia. By 1897, the Zionist movement begins, and this is the idea that there's going to be an independent Jewish state in Israel. It is launched by Theodor Herzl. He's the founder of the World Zionist Organization. He is not a particularly religious Jew. He launches this after the Dreyfus Affair. The Dreyfus Affair was this famous affair in France in which there was a member of the French army who was Jewish. He was falsely accused of spying for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It unleashed this giant wave of anti-Semitism. He was basically condemned despite evidence because of the anti-Semitism, and Herzl decided, well, anti-Semitism is too strong a threat. The Jews need some homeland to call their own. In 1917, Britain declares the Balfour Declaration. This says there will be a Jewish homeland in the area of Israel. The amount of land that was promised to
I wonder if he's also going to say that when the Arabs were helping the British in World War I to fuck the Ottomans up this way, to hit the Germany and Austro-Hungary and the Ottomans in their weakest point, which was the Ottomans, that they also promised the Arab leaders a state in Palestine. I wonder.
Jews was actually not just what is labeled Israel here, but also Jordan, which at this time was called Transjordan, which makes some sense in the sense that the Arab states around it
And then
were
what was it, like the Sykes-Picot agreement, where the English and French guy basically tried to divide it up into two, like this whole area up into two slots so that they could call it, like, so they could administer both of them after the war. Yeah. I guess he doesn't want people to know that these promises were made on both sides. Yeah.
going to be Egypt, is going to be Saudi.
Just so the British could win a war, basically. They promised it to the Arabs because they knew that the Arabs could fight the Ottomans, and they had a good incentive to as well. So that makes sense. Do you know why, in part, that they promised Jews the same thing? It's because Balfour was kind of anti-Semitic, and he thought Jews were a lot more powerful than they actually were. He thought that if he promised this land to Jews, and the other people around him, David Lloyd George especially, they thought that Jewish people could use their international finance powers to defeat Germany and the Ottomans for them. Yeah. So they kind of, like, the Balfour Declaration was in part born out of anti-Semitism.
Saudi Arabia, it was going to be Syria, it was going to be Lebanon. There are a bevy of Arab states that surround this entire region. In 1920, there are Arab pogroms against Jews in Jerusalem. So when people say that there was no conflict between Arabs and Jews until the creation of the State of Israel, that's just a lie. It's not true at all. There were major Arab pogroms against Jews in Jerusalem because Jews wanted to commit the great sin of praying at the Western Wall. This, of course, was not allowed.
Well, I think there was, again, these pogroms were inexcusable. I think when people say there was peaceful relations between Jews and Arabs in the Ottoman Empire, like, they lived side by side for a long time. The Ottoman Empire was not very nice to Jews. It was very rough on Jewish people. But the civilians did live amongst each other for quite a while, like for hundreds or thousands of years. Like, they lived together for a long time. The reason there was a lot of unrest at this point was because the Arabs realized that they were not necessarily going to get the nation they were promised. They were occupied by Britain, and the British started letting a lot of Jews arrive in historic Palestine without any consultation from the locals. And what the Jews were doing when they were there, like the early Zionists, was they were buying up land that was owned by foreign landowners. And the people a lot of that land included houses that was lived on by tenant farmers, by people who were working the land for these landowners. And when the Jews bought up those tenant farms, they basically would instill rules to say that only Jews can work here because they wanted to establish a presence. So the people who worked there were just kicked out, which is not a very, you wouldn't accept that in the modern world, I think. And if it happens to you at the time in the 40s, after you've been promised self-determination, what you get is people from outside coming and buying up the house that you live in and then kicking you out. Yeah, you're probably going to be a bit angry. That's why I don't think I know there were pogroms in Syria in the 1800s, late 1800s. I don't know if there were pogroms in Palestine before 1917, like how much anti-Semitic violence there was from the Arab population. I don't know.
In 1922, this is post-World War I now, the British are given a mandate over the area of Palestine. They start walking back the promises of the Balfour Declaration. The Brits separate off Transjordan, and they call it Jordan, and they say that's going to go to the Arabs. In 1929, there's another major riot. That's
interesting he says that they walk back the promises. But he hasn't mentioned that they walk back any of the promises to the Arabs. So I guess he seems like it's reasonable for Jews to be frustrated at the walkbacks, but not, okay.
Anti-Jewish riot in Hebron. The British, in response to all of this violence and all of this rioting, they decide they're going to just continually attempt to appease the Arab population in British Mandate Palestine. So they begin restricting land transfers to Jews. In 1937...
Yeah, because the land transfers were also evicting people. Yeah, okay. I think that one's probably reasonable. They also, it's right, they also moved a lot of Jews out of particular parts. They moved all the Jews out of Gaza at that point. And they moved the Jews out of Hebron and a few other places where there was like a lot of danger. Yeah. The Hebron massacre was really gross. Like, if you look at the details of it, it's like, it's very visceral, like very gory kind of killing of men, women, and children. Yeah.
Appeal Commission suggests a partition plan with control by the British retained of Tel Aviv and Jaffa and Jerusalem. And there would be like a small sliver of land Israel would get, but it would be pretty divided. It'd be like this little land here, maybe a little bit up here, and then most of the Negev, which is basically just an empty desert. By this point, Jews have been moving to Palestine in increasing numbers because anti-Semitism in Europe is getting worse, but also because there's this nascent labor and Zionist movement, and they're really making the agricultural areas flourish again. Economic growth in this region at this time is because Jews were moving in and they were bringing their resources with them. They were bringing their know-how with them, and they were working the land. And this was driving more Arab immigration to the land also, because economic activity always drives population movements. In 1939, under Arab pressure, the Brits restrict Jewish immigration to 75,000 Jews per year. The Jews are saying, listen, we have...
Now he's going to talk about Irgun and Lehi and their terror attacks, isn't he? Surely.
Like millions of people who want to move here. And the Brits say, we're not doing that, 75,000 per year, because we have to get along with the Arab population. This is just before the Holocaust, obviously. And the Arabs reject this. The Arabs are very angry about this. They continue to launch low-level attacks on the British. They continue to attack Jewish populations. World War II breaks out. The Jews, including Jews who were heavily pushing the British to establish a Jewish state and to lift restrictions on Jewish immigration into British Mandate Palestine, they side with the Brits, right? They form their own divisions. They're trying to help the British. What they say is that we fight for Jewish immigration to Palestine as though there were no Germans, and we fight the Germans as if there were no British, right? That's the way the Jews see it in British Mandate Palestine. They're attempting to negotiate. The Arabs side with Hitler. Okay, during World War II, you have Hajmin al-Husseini. He is the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, one of the Palestinian leaders at the time, the Arab leaders at the time, and he was literally meeting with Hitler, attempting to encourage Hitler to establish a final solution in the Holy Land should the Germans be able to conquer that area, which the Germans came pretty close.
I don't think I've ever heard him make that claim before. That's the Netanyahu claim. So what he said there was almost true. Al-Husseini was a bad guy. He's a very bad leader. I think you can summarize this whole British Mandate era to say that I think the Arabs had a better case. Their case was that they'd lived there for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and they were the ones who lived there. They were the ones who helped the British fight off the Ottomans, and they were promised the state in return. I feel like that was the strongest case, because the alternative, like to appease the Jewish claim, would be to remove the Arabs. So they had a strong case, but they had the worst advocates. All of their leaders, like Al-Husseini, were established, like their rule was established through a very old school feudal system where they were not particularly representative of public opinion, and there wasn't really any meritocracy, whereas the Jews had a less convincing case, but they had like world-class advocates because it was meritocratic. It was like a modern movement for the time. I think that's a good way to summarize it. The thing with saying that, what did he say about Al-Husseini? Let me double check.
And you had
I don't want to
revolution in the Holy leaders at the time, and he was literally meeting with Hitler, attempting to encourage Hitler to establish a final solution in the Holy Land should the Germans be able to conquer that area.
This talking point is so gross. Like trying to encourage Hitler to do a final solution. This is like, because I know he's referring to here. He's referring to the Bibi claim that that Al-Husseini actually was convincing Hitler to do the Holocaust. And actually Hitler didn't want to do the Holocaust before Al-Husseini convinced him. Husseini claimed that in a biography. Yeah, Husseini's a liar. Sorry. The dates don't match up. Husseini was not convincing Hitler to do the Holocaust. He wasn't encouraging Hitler. Hitler was already doing the Holocaust, and Husseini was basically affirming that position and saying he agreed with it. Netanyahu just makes it like he does it. It's not like you can take it out of context. It's just very clear dishonesty.
Other attacks on the Jewish community in 1920, 1921, 1929 were instigated by a call of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was later sought for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials because he had a central role in fomenting the final solution. He flew to Berlin. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. He said, burn them.
So he's saying that Hitler didn't want to exterminate them at the time, he wanted to expel them. But this meeting happened in November 1941. The final solution was already in place in June, in the summer. Like, the Babin Yar massacre had already happened. The Einsatzgruppen were already storming through Eastern Europe, fucking gunning down Jews in the tens of thousands. Hitler had already made up his mind. He did, like, believe it or not, Hitler doesn't need to be convinced by a fucking brown person to kill Jews. Okay, it's so gross. Yeah.
area, which the Germans came pretty close.
It's Holocaust revisionism. I don't think there should be a problem with calling it that because that's what they're doing. It's revising the narrative of the Holocaust in a way that is dishonest, and it's in aid of a particular political goal to push a political narrative. Yeah.
You had Rommel literally in Egypt, right? Rommel was over here. Okay, so fast forward, you're now after World War II. Still, the
Ben
British...
is not technically right, though, because Ben said he was trying to encourage Hitler to do a Holocaust. He wasn't trying to encourage him. He was just kind of saying that, like, he agreed with what was already happening. Benjamin now, he says it in a lot more, like, a clearly dishonest way, but I don't know. I think both Bens here are not doing great on that point.
mandate is limiting the amount of Jewish immigration into British Mandate Palestine because they're attempting to keep this
Wannsee was 1942. But again, the Nazis came up with Wannsee and the gas chambers, again, on their own because the death squads were not working. Because one of the big reasons the death squads weren't working was because it was expensive, but also because it was traumatizing the soldiers. A lot of the soldiers were just refusing to do it, and they were having breakdowns and shit. So that's why they developed this more industrial system where it was a lot more depersonalized and it was faster and more efficient. Yeah. And then they experimented with like truck exhausts like in Treblinka, and then they eventually figured out like Zyklon B was the way to go. Yeah. Again, didn't need much persuasion from a brown person.
conflict between the Jews and the Arabs simmering at a lower level. Okay, 1947, there's a UN partition plan because now the British mandate in Palestine, they want to end it. They want to withdraw. They don't want to be there anymore. So the UN says, okay, we're going to vote on a partition plan. It retains Jerusalem as internationally governed.
Whoosh.
Okay, so it would not have been Jewish territory or Arab territory. It would have been internationally governed. It's just this fragmented, ridiculous state. Okay, the state for the Jews would have been like a slice here, a little bit of a slice of the coastal area here, and then the Negev desert down here. The Jews are like, give us whatever you got, right? Whatever you're going to give us, we will take. The Arabs instead decide that they're going to launch a bunch of low-level conflicts. So there's this kind of low-level, quiet.
So he's not going to mention here that the Arabs, after a lot of them had lost their homes, that had been kicked out of their homes, that the Jews at the time only made up 2/3 of the population and only owned 6% of the land. And this partition plan guarantees them 55% of the land. Yeah, I don't know. I guess he's not going to mention any of that. Like the dissatisfaction was a bit understandable, I think. And also, it's a bit dishonest, I think, to assume that Jews were just going to be happy with the partition borders. That's why people like Ben and like Ben Shapiro will even say that the partition plan was ridiculous because, again, like the Zionists, they wanted more, and they knew that if they could use fighting, they would use it to get more, which they did. So.
War that's going on for about a year with Arabs attacking Jewish settlements and attempting to kill Jews and Jews attempting to defend themselves. May 14th, 1940.
That's 47. Just Jews attempting to defend themselves. So we completely skipped over Irgun and Leahy. Okay. Is he going to talk about the Nakba, I wonder?
48, the British mandate officially ends. Israel declares its independence, right? This is Yom HaAtzmaut, or as the Arabs like to call it, the Nakba, right? They call it a disaster that Israel was established. The leader of Israel...
Bro! Normally, people like Ben would just ignore it. Or they would try to say that they fled because the Arabs told them to. Oh, what a fucking slime. That's why they call it the Nakba, not because there were, even, again, before Israel declares independence, because there were massacres in several villages, because there were direct orders given to the IDF, to the newly formed IDF, or the Haganah before them, to shift people out of their villages, to blow up their houses, and also to make sure that they couldn't come back. Damn. They called it the Nakba because they were anti-Semitic. How can you gloss over it like that? Just wow. Damn, Ben. Bruh. Oh.
time is David Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion is no right-winger. He's no hardcore right-winger. Ben-Gurion was a labor socialist. Ben-Gurion was very much in favor of a wide variety of negotiations. He was quite anti-religious in sort of his own persona, but he understood the necessity of there being a Jewish state. In their founding documents, they asked...
Okay. I don't know if we can go through all the notes that we took on, like, the fact that this is even according to Benny Morris's research, that yeah, from this, when he debunks like an old school pro-Israel person on 1948, and all these quotes from Ben Gurion about how if there's a war in many parts of the country, new Jewish settlement will not be possible unless there is a transfer of the Arab peasantry. I support compulsory transfer. I don't see in it anything immoral. Very socialist take. Chaim Weizmann, this was one of the original Zionists who went all around Europe, I think, to try and get support for his movement. If 500,000 Arabs could be transferred, 2 million Jews could be put in their place. That, of course, would be a first installment. This is in 41. They're thinking about this pretty far ahead of time.
Ask the Arabs to stay. If you read the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, they explicitly say, we want to be a state for all of our citizens. Yes, we're a Jewish state, but we want Arabs to stay. We want them to become citizens. Instead...
Again, when is the Israeli Declaration of Independence? May 14th. So 4 days after... no way, sorry. It's like, is it 4 days? When was the finalizing of Plan Daly, the first operation? March 48. Yeah, just after they've put in place a plan to basically fuck the Arabs out of their villages. And even in the south, there were still operations where they were basically airstriking these villages that didn't have anything that could actually, like no shelters or anything, so people had to flee there. And by then, everyone knew that there were massacres. They weren't going to take that chance. So it's not like, even if they flee knowing that the soldiers are coming, that's like one of the weird points as well, is that we know there were massacres. We know that there were people who were directly told to leave at gunpoint and then their houses blown up afterwards. And then we also know that another group of people left because they knew what was about those first two things happening. And I still count that as forced. I think if you are in a village, and a village 2 miles down the road, because again, it's a small region, 2 miles down the road has just been either massacred or people have been forced out at gunpoint, you're going to leave as well. You are still forced out at that point, especially if you know that they're advancing, which they did. And again, even Plan Daly goes like a little bit beyond the 47 borders, like these parts up here. So like the partition plan. So yeah, they were intending to take as much as they could. I don't think it was all directly on the borders, but
all of the surrounding Arab countries declare war. Israel is surrounded on every side.
Also, yeah, so that declaration, like, just, it didn't, even if it was legally binding, I don't think it was. Yeah, I just don't, like, their actions probably speak a bit louder than the words in their Declaration of Independence. I think there are some exceptions. Like, I think in Haifa, they asked the citizens to stay after winning the battle, but they left anyway. But that was even pro-Israel historians will admit that those events were rarities. That was not the norm. The norm was that they were forced out. And there were maybe like 6 villages where they had radio broadcasts from Arab leaders telling them to leave.
Hostile states. every single side, right? So you got Lebanon up north, you got Syria here, you got Jordan, you got Saudi Arabia, you got Egypt down here. And then there are a bunch of far-flung states that are also getting involved, right? Morocco was part of the 1948 war. You have a bunch of states that have decided they are going to invade and they are going to destroy Israel. Like they're just going to strangle it in the crib. And they're openly saying this. And not only are they openly saying this, they're telling the Arabs who are living in the Jewish areas, get out and get out of the way so our armies can come in and we can wipe the state off the map. Well, that's not how it ends up, right? The way that it ends up is that the Jews end up basically retaining pretty much everything that's on this map with the exception of the old city of Jerusalem, right? So Jerusalem ends up basically split down the middle. Jerusalem is not controlled.
Like a fetus in the womb. It's just like, and I guess he's not going to mention that Jordan and Israel are operating in secret together as well. So Jordan can get the West Bank and Israel can get like their end of things. Because neither of them want to live next to a Palestinian state.
Controlled by the Jews at this point. The Temple Mount is still controlled by the Jordanians. The way that people speak about this particular period is as if there was a Palestinian state at this point. There was not. By 1964, the Arab states have decided that they need almost a propaganda effort here. So they create the Palestine Liberation Organization. The Palestine Liberation Organization is a terrorist group. It explicitly calls for the destruction of Israel. Now you will note, at this point, Israel does not control any of this or any of this. So when they say Palestine Liberation Organization, they mean this whole thing, right? That whole thing is supposed to go away because Israel doesn't even control that at that point. And they're not calling for Palestine to be liberated from Jordan or from Egypt. They're calling for the complete destruction of the state of Israel.
And the PLO were they were pretty crazy in the 60s. Like. But again, the problem is that you've just created a refugee problem of 700,000 people just living in camps. And what else are they going to do? And then eventually some of them just realize, like they know full well that their old houses are just like a walk away, like a couple of hours walk away. And they can't go there because Israel's not letting them back. Yeah, it's a pretty, kind of like a breeding ground for radicalization, you know?
Okay, so in 1967, the Arabs mobilized for all-out war. And this includes Egypt, it includes Jordan, it includes Saudi, it includes Syria. This is going to be the big war where they finally get rid of this nascent Jewish state that is less than 20 years old, right?
How did he describe that?
Arabs mobilized for all-out war. And this includes Egypt, it includes Jordan, it includes Saudi, it includes Syria. This is going to be the big war where they finally get rid of this nascent Jewish state that is less than 20 years old, right? And this is just less than 3 decades after the...
How much did it include Saudi? I guess he didn't. He said they started mobilizing, so he doesn't say that that Israel was attacked. That's smart, because that would just be a lie. Yeah, it's going to talk about the preemptive shit. I guess he's not going to talk about how Israel was like pushing past the demilitarized zone here and pushing people out, like Syrians, out of their places as well. I don't think he's going to mention that, is he?
Holocaust. And Israel instead launches...
Oh yeah, someone said there's no Jordanian flag. Because I guess I've heard him on Twitter a while ago saying that he wanted that the Palestinian state should just be Jordan. Yeah. Because I guess he like believes that the West Bank all belongs to Israel as well.
Old, right? And this is just less than 3 decades after the Holocaust. And Israel instead launches a preemptive war. They see this coming.
Preemptive?
They destroy the entire Egyptian Air Force on the ground. And in 6 days, they proceed to take the Golan Heights, which is this area of Syria. Israel takes over the entire Sinai Desert, takes all of Judea and Samaria to the Jordan River, takes all of the Gaza Strip, takes control of the old city of Jerusalem. Right? They do all of this in 6 days, which is why it's considered a miracle by the state of Israel. I mean, it's an unbelievable military performance. So in 6 days, they take what was going to be the war for their destruction, and they proceed to expand their borders from this tiny thing to this, and all of this. Israel then proceeds to give up like all...
He looks so happy there. Did you see that?
...their borders from this tiny thing to this, and all of this.
Oh, fuck, I missed it. It's so quick.
Their destruction, they proceed to expand their borders from this tiny thing to this, and all of this.
Look at him, he's so happy.
Israel then...
He loves a bit of conquest, you know? And again, Jihadi box, no one cared. Fuck off.
Then proceeds to give up like all of it, right? So Israel keeps the Golan Heights because that's a military necessity. The UN
obviously.
calls for Israel to withdraw from occupied territory.
Again, also in part because as soon as they took the Golan Heights, a bunch of farmers and settlers were ramming in there to try and use up the fertile soil and just to establish a presence there.
Now, the language here matters if you care about the UN. I don't happen to care about the UN. I think it's a garbage organization.
Whoa.
But if you do care about the UN, there's a resolution put forward by the UN Security Council. It calls for Israel to withdraw from occupied territories, not the occupied territories. Now, that makes a difference because if it said the occupied territories, presumably it would mean anything Israel won, it would have to withdraw from if you care about the UN, which you really shouldn't. But it says occupied territories, which means subject to negotiations. The 67 Arab leagues.
He's just a colonialist. He's like, yeah, fuck the UN. We're just going to keep, because that's what I guess that's what Israel did. They annexed East Jerusalem before the international community even had a chance to stop them from doing it. Before they had a chance to condemn it. They made sure to censor it in the press before they did it. They made sure to keep the government meetings down. They tried to make the Knesset debate really fast and low key. Yeah, because even America didn't approve of that.
Summit happens. And they agree in Khartoum, Sudan, on the 3 no's. No peace, no recognition, no negotiations. And these are the 3 no's that are going to govern the Arabs all the way through. Basically until now, until the Abraham Accords. These were the 3 no's that mattered. And this is all the way in 1967. So whenever people talk about there needs to be a 2-state solution, why couldn't they have come to an agreement? Because literally one side said there will be no peace, no recognition, and no negotiations. One side has accepted every single peace deal provided to it to this point in time. And one side has said we will not accept any peace deal.
That is not necessarily true. We just read about it today in 51 when they were going past the armistice lines between Israel and Syria throughout the late 40s and early 50s. And when it came to the West Bank and Gaza, they straight from 67 onwards, settlers started moving in, where it made peace deals, which means peace deals are harder and harder to achieve, unless you're planning to one day take it all for yourself.
And yet somehow there's a moral equivalency between the two sides. Explain that one. Okay, 73, holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. Everybody is fasting, everybody is praying, and a surprise attack is launched on the state of Israel. The prime minister is Golda Meir. She gets caught completely by surprise. They were warned, and they didn't take it seriously. Israel suffers extraordinary casualties in the 73 Yom Kippur War, and then once again maintains or expands its borders a little bit. 79, Camp David.
Yom Kippur was a really bad one for Israel. Like even in the early days, they were getting really rammed up in Golan Heights and down south, but it's Syria and Egypt. That was when Moshe Dayan was running around talking about this is going to be the fall of the third temple. And they were talking about using nukes and shit. And then I think they had to eventually, they had to ask America for aid. That was when kind of like Israeli-American relations kind of stepped up a little bit.
David Accords. Finally, there's a breakthrough. Menachem Begin takes over as prime minister of Israel, a very right-wing prime minister. There were 2 major parties in Israel at this time.
Also a terrorist, Menachem Begin. Not only was he firing mortars over at Jaffa in the early days in 48, but he was leading Irgun, the guys who bombed the King David Hotel. This old thing in 46. I think he was also in 77 was when he really like properly made settlements like a high government priority in the West Bank, when he started expanding the big settlement blocks. Yeah.
Likud and Labor. This is the first Likud prime minister. And one of the things that he does is he comes to a peace accord with Anwar Sadat, who is the nationalist leader of Egypt. And in those peace accords, Israel gives up the entire Sinai Desert. Israel gives up the entire thing to Egypt in return for basically a cold peace. Anwar Sadat is then assassinated. In 1982, the Jordanian monarchy is deeply afraid that the Palestine Liberation Organization is going to overthrow the monarchy. They expel the Palestinians. The Palestinians end up in Lebanon, tens of thousands of Palestinians. Palestinian terrorist groups begin firing rockets over into Israel from South Lebanon. In 1982, Menachem Begin launches a war in Lebanon. Israel ends up basically going all the way up to the capital of Beirut and nearly occupying the entire country. And then they end up withdrawing under international pressure in what is considered sort of a disastrous war for the state of Israel, as always, whenever Israel withdraws from a territory, terrorist groups take over and then threaten Israel. This is the constant pattern. No matter, the only time this has not happened is with regard to withdrawal from the Sinai Desert. 1980.
Yeah, I wonder. Does that mean it's bad? Yeah, is it bad to withdraw then? I wonder how. Oh yeah, I wonder what could have possibly radicalized people by Israel's presence in Lebanon, right? Not least of all, Mr. Sharon allowing a bunch of Christian militiamen into a Palestinian refugee camp and slaughtering 1,000 people. Ooh. They call Sharon the butcher of Beirut for this one. Even his own government found him responsible.
The Intifada breaks out. This is the Palestinians in the Judea and Samaria region. The reason that I use the terms Judea and Samaria is they are more historically accurate. People call it the West Bank. Why? Because Jordan occupied it, and this is the West Bank of the Jordan River.
You know, like, the name of a place is not to do with historical accuracy. It's all arbitrary because all these places have been called different things at different times, you idiot. You call a thing what it's called by the general international community. That's what you call a thing. What? It's called the West Bank because that's what it's called. Anyway.
So the only reason that it's referred to as the West Bank, which is really historically anomalous, right? It's on the east side of Israel, but it's on the West Bank of the Jordan. That's a holdover from the time when the Jordanians occupied this entire area. Again, no one cares that Jordan occupied quote-unquote Palestinian land or that Egypt occupied quote-unquote Palestinian land. They only care when Jews...
Yeah, that's true. When people try to say that the Arabs were all about liberating Palestinians, it's like, hey, why did Jordan hold on to West Bank after doing a secret deal with Israel to take it in the first place? Same with Egypt, yeah. But I wonder if it's like... I guess with Ben saying that, is it also leads you down the line of like, yeah, there's a difference here between the Palestinians and between the rest of the Arab world. Because for almost all of this history, the majority of Palestinians are just struggling to get by. That's all it is. Most of them aren't fighting. Yeah.
Occupy historically Jewish land. That's when things start to get really hot and bothered. Okay, so anyway, the Intifada breaks out in 1987. You get these widespread riots and violent confrontations and terrorist attacks all the way from 1987 to 1991. By this time, Yitzhak Rabin has taken over as Prime Minister of Israel, and pushed by George H.W. Bush, the government of the State of Israel starts negotiating with the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is a really weird shift, considering that Yasser Arafat is a master terrorist responsible for tons of murders on his hands.
So again, he's not going to say that Arafat at this point in 88, like since 88, had renounced terrorism and recognized Israel. He did that in front of the UN. That was his policy from then on. But apparently, like, it's okay to have fucking ex-terrorists in the Israeli government or ex-war criminals, but not for Palestinians. Okay, Ben. It's just there's something about just like the entitlement of it all, of like the really hardcore pro-Israel people. It's just such an entitlement. They just feel like they have this internalized, like this immutable right to this piece of land. Like, it's so weird. And then they get to have everything their way as well. Like, fuck.
And he, at this point, has been expelled all the way to Tunis, right? He's not even in the picture. And Israel brings him out of retirement, basically, and says, why don't we negotiate with you? And maybe you can make all of this stop. So in 1993, they signed the Oslo Accords, and that is where you get Bill Clinton presiding over one of the least successful international negotiations in the history of international politics. The Oslo Accords have been a complete and utter failure. That ends with Yitzhak Rabin, who's this historic general who has been Prime Minister of Israel a couple of times by this point, shaking hands with a mass-murdering terrorist, Yasser Arafat, and this was going to initiate a new period.
Wait, can you not say this? Should Anwar Sadat have not shook hands with Menachem Begin and negotiated with him? Should he have not? Should he have just said, oh, here's Anwar Sadat shaking hands with a mass-murdering terrorist, which Begin was. So why is it okay on your end, Ben? Golly. Double standard. Yeah, it is a double standard. Is he going to talk about how Likud basically... I don't know, how do I word it? I was going to say got this guy killed, but they did do a bit of kind of quasi-incitement. A lot of like doing that fucking march with the noose and the fake coffin and people chanting that in blood and fire they were going to expel Rabin for talking to Arafat. That march was led by Netanyahu. Damn.
Of health and accord, and there's going to be peace. All that the PLO had to do was acknowledge that Israel existed and had a right to exist.
They did that, yeah.
Stop educating their children in terrorism and cease the violence. They couldn't do any of those things, right? So none of that happened. Instead, there's an uptick in violence, pretty dramatic uptick
He's just lying. Like, Arafat in 88 recognized Israel. No Israeli has ever recognized the Palestinian state. They've recognized the PLO, but they've never, and the PNA, but they've never recognized a Palestinian state. Again, we're going to get into the part where we don't like Arafat, but yeah, this is from New York Times, 1988. Arafat says PLO accepted Israel. Yeah, this was his whole address to the UN. Anyway. Oh yeah, we're not going to talk about Rabin's assassination because it makes the fucking Likud dipshits that Ben Shapiro supports look really bad.
Violence after the Oslo Accords. In 1998, Israel again attempts to make some sort of concessions to the Palestinians, this time under the first tenure of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel does not want to govern these areas. Israel is not interested in governing millions of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
I mean, why did Netanyahu oppose the Oslo Accords then? Why did he keep expanding settlements into the West Bank when he was told not to? Why did he give a big speech saying that Jerusalem will always be united? We will never give up East Jerusalem. Why? If he doesn't want to go, I guess they do want to govern Jerusalem though, right?
Strip or in Judea and Samaria. The last thing they want to do is have their soldiers wandering around these dangerous areas or to preside over these areas. All they want, and all Israel has ever wanted, is to separate off from these particular areas and say, listen, you guys rule yourselves. Like, just stop bothering us, please.
This is the bit that I hate. Like, if that were the case, then how can you hold these two positions at once? Because Ben Shapiro likes settlements. He thinks they're based. How can you hold the position of expanding settlements, but also we just want you guys to have your state and leave us alone? I don't get it. Or the annexation of East Jerusalem, or the movements past the demilitarized zone in northern Israel, between Israel and Syria. Why, Ben? Why?
Okay, and you will see that this is the continued pattern. 2000, Israel engages in the Camp David negotiations. Bill Clinton is still president at this point, and the prime minister of Israel is now a guy named Ehud Barak. And Ehud Barak is a real dove. Ehud Barak wants to make as many concessions as humanly possible, right? This picture here, which is just an unbelievable picture. Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak trying to push Yasser Arafat into negotiating, right? They're all joking, they're all happy and all this kind of crap. Ehud Barak offered everything. Ehud Barak offered complete control over the Temple Mount with just like a little bit of a recognition that Israel has a historic claim.
It was custodianship. It wasn't complete control. What are you talking about? Okay, that's one wrong.
Religiously to the Temple Mount, Arafat turned it down flat. He offered control over virtually all of Judea and Samaria. He offered control over the Gaza Strip, right?
So he offered 92% of the land. I don't think there were was it a 9-to-1 land swap or like a 1-to-9, so like a not a very good land swap. And I think they were going to kind of disconnect this area, but there was like a bridge going over it, so it wasn't technically going to be like a Bantustan, but I don't know. I need to look more into the Camp David thing. And also they wanted to control the airspace and the fucking the water, so I guess I need to look into this though, because I think I have a feeling that Arafat was maybe more bad faith in these negotiations than I originally believed, but I might look into it. I do know that I still don't know for 100% sure if he launched the second intifada himself, but I do know that he didn't try to stop it. So we might look at that. Because I think Arafat's big contention was refugees, but I don't know exactly what Arafat's offer was for refugees, because I've heard different claims. Zizek calls Arafat the man who never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They weren't given a right of return. Well, I thought it was going to be like a right of return to Gaza and the West Bank, but not to Israel, like only 100,000 people to Israel. And I think Arafat said that he wanted to be recognized in principle, but negotiated over time, whilst Israeli demographic concerns were kept in mind. I don't know. I don't even know how right of return could ever. The only way I could ever imagine right of return being negotiated now would be that Israel recognizes it, just recognizes it, and then it has to be negotiated just in periods by two states on equal footing. Realistically, it'll be much easier for refugees to go to Gaza and the West Bank, or maybe even to get resettled somewhere else, like in Jordan or Lebanon. But like, I don't think there should ever be a cap on how many can also go to Israel, because if we're 10 or 20 years down the line and there's peaceful relations, I don't know why you wouldn't leave that right of return open for people, even if you've like, rather than having an arbitrary cap and just meeting it, then it's just blocked forever. Because then the cap is just like, again, like being entitled to a Jewish state, like even if there's no security concern, right? Anyway. Into other places which are radically anti-Semitic. No, for Palestinians, not Israelis.
Palestinian state, boom, done. Arafat does not even negotiate.
Like functionally, if they don't have control of the airspace and there's like the water issue, doesn't that mean that this is what I've heard. I've heard that under the Camp David Accords, Palestine would not have been a state. It wouldn't have been like a de facto state. A sovereign state. I don't know. I just need to. I'll look into it more though. We'll just leave this bit because I know Arafat is also quite snaky around this point. I know even in Madrid, he wouldn't even he wouldn't renounce a terror attack, and that kind of like held up a lot of the peace conference there. He supported Saddam's war in Kuwait, which really fucked over the Palestinians who lived in Kuwait. Yeah, he had a lot of bad moments, and also the Oslo by 99 had failed to meet its deadline because Oslo was supposed to be done and wrapped up by 1999, and it hadn't reached that. So his Arafat's approval rating was getting fucked by then. Lorna Box still dodging. Shazam, I'm sorry. I don't know why you think you're so entitled to my intention when there are, how many people are in this chat? I'm sorry. Hang on. Like, I don't know who the fuck you are when there are, what is that, 800 people watching? And you're like, Lornabox won't answer my question. That he must have read it. It must be because he's scared of my incredible high 5,000 IQ point. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, how do you even know that I've been reading all your chats? Unless you have to fucking tag me. I'd be like, oh, Lornabox is too scared to answer my question. Fuck, Jesus. I'm reacting to Ben Shapiro. I've got some chatters who I can notice from time to time. I've got my own thoughts. And I have you poking at me like a vulture. Fuck off.
He just launches a massive round of violence. I remember this because I was actually in Israel right about the time they launched the Intifada, and there were suicide bombings on a fairly regular basis. They blew up a Sparrow's Pizza shop. I was supposed to be at that corner like a couple of hours later. God. This was a thing that was really scary. It was really violent. Remember, he launched that not after Israel did something aggressive. He launched that after Israel offered him everything he could possibly want if he weren't a damned liar who just wanted Israel wiped off the map. Damn. This, again, is the great lie, is that there is desire for a two-state solution from the Palestinian side. So far, there has been no evidence whatsoever that this is the...
Wait, that's not... Okay, even if you buy the narrative, let's just say Arafat was a total snake who fucking hated Palestinians and shit, like, or who hated Israel and wanted to get a one-state solution, whatever. The majority of Palestinians throughout the 90s supported a two-state solution. And into the 2000s as well. And even throughout the Second Intifada, there were points where a majority of Israelis were supporting a two-state solution, even like 2003 with the Geneva Accords, 2004. So, and Palestinians as well supported at that point. Maybe I can find my notes for that one. Hang on. Where are we? It's a bit of a shame when you think about it, when to consider that in all this time, in all this time, Palestinians have had 2 elections. And in one of them, they didn't even get what they wanted. What they wanted was what they wanted from that 2006 election when Hamas got elected was that they wanted a national unity government, but they also, like 75% of them wanted Hamas to adopt a 2-state solution. Their main reason for voting for Hamas was to end corruption, not for like the crazy violence and shit. Let me see. Is this the Geneva Accord table? Yeah, here. This is the Geneva Accords with the Clinton, which was based around the Clinton parameters. And for Israelis, it's got 64%, 64, 52, 53, 52. And for Palestinians, at least for 1 year, it had 54% approval. So there has been desire, even in 2004, like 4 years into the Second Intifada, December 2004. So, but by this point, the Intifada had also got Sharon elected, and Sharon wanted nothing to do with this shit. But even here, the thing that's interesting is where their disapproval came from. So end of conflict, 69. Security arrangements, they're fine with that, generally. Jerusalem, a bit more of a sticking point. Refugees, a little bit. Borders and territorial, okay, that's got reasonable majority. It was demilitarized state that the Palestinians really didn't want, where they were really at odds. But, yeah.
The case. Okay, 2004, Arafat dies, and Mahmoud Abbas takes over. Mahmoud Abbas is himself a terror supporter. He wrote his entire doctoral dissertation on Holocaust denial.
He did that, okay, but he wasn't a terrorist supporter. Mahmoud Abbas's approach is like non-violence, like non-violent resistance. That's in a military occupation. That's too far the other way. I don't think Ben Shapiro would. Well, Ben Shapiro would. Ben Shapiro would say that Palestinians all they need to do is throw down their arms and do nothing for like a year or like 5-10 years, and then Israel will finally But that's what he thinks. But yeah, Mahmoud Abbas was a Holocaust denier, and then he went through this big reform period where he like visited Auschwitz and renounced all his Holocaust claims and shit like that. But yeah, I don't think Mahmoud Abbas is like the only violence that Mahmoud Abbas really endorses is like security cooperation with Israel. To use violence against like Palestinian militants and to out them to Israeli intelligence and shit. Ugh.
And why it's correct. Israel, in 2005, under the auspices of Ariel Sharon, who's one of the great hawks in Israeli history, right? He was the general in the 1973 war who ended up pushing all the way down close to Cairo. He was called the bulldozer. He's this famous general. He unilaterally...
The great hawk who also opposed all peace talks. Like, all of them, yeah.
Withdraws from the Gaza Strip. There are a bunch of Jewish areas right in the northern tip of the Gaza Strip. Jewish soldiers went in and removed Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. These are places people have lived for decades.
Yeah.
They removed them, and they just turned them over to the Palestinians. Hamas, a terrorist group, immediately rushed in and burned everything. They burned the greenhouses. They burned all the Jewish houses.
Well, they didn't burn the greenhouses. Some of them were looted by independent actors. The greenhouses were burned by settlers. They were destroyed by settlers who didn't want the Palestinians to have them when they left. That's what happened to the greenhouses. Sorry, Ben.
They knocked down all the good infrastructure, and then they just took over the place. This is when you start to see a difference emerging among the Palestinians in terms of governance. You've got Judea and Samaria, the West Bank here. You've got the Gaza Strip here. In 2005, Abbas wins the Palestinian elections, but only because Hamas and Islamic Jihad boycott the elections. Okay, in 2000.
I wonder, when I was listening to that Destiny Katie conversation earlier today, he was saying that the intention of the Gaza pullout was to fragment Palestinians. I've only seen that quote about the formaldehyde thing, but I don't know how reliable that, like, I don't like relying on singular quotes. But all the same, whether it was intentional or not, that was the consequence. The consequence of pulling out of Gaza was that you gave a massive propaganda W to Hamas, because they just got to say, well, the Israelis left because we're violent. All right. So that's they left because of us. They claimed victory for it, which is why I think like yeah, the majority of Palestinians owed the Gaza pullout to Hamas. They said like the PA, Fatah, and fucking Abbas had nothing to do with it, basically. So that's pretty bad. And yeah, so they kind of handed that over to Hamas in a way, because it wasn't negotiated. If it's not negotiated, then Palestinians like they can just decide for themselves what caused it.
2006, after Israel withdraws from Gaza, remember, Israel's not in control of anything here now. Hamas wins.
I remember this. I used this for my video. I remember grabbing this clip for my video. Israel's not in control of anything here now, apart from the border, and the population registry, and the maritime border, and the airspace, and also Egypt's in control of this part and the sea as well. Eek. Again, you can say why. You can say it's because of security and Hamas terror and shit like that. But you can also still say that Israel still controls quite a bit of Gaza. They control all the goods that go in and out as well.
Wins an election. So the first move is not, oh, look, Israel wants to make concessions and make peace with us. The first move is, why don't we elect a terrorist group to actually represent us? Okay, in 2008, Israel's response to this is, what if we just offer you everything? So Ehud Olmert becomes prime minister.
Well, yeah, again, of course they wouldn't say Israel wants to make peace because they didn't. The unilateral disengagement had nothing to do with peace. Sharon never said it was about peace. He said that there was no peace. He said there was no negotiations. He said there could never be negotiations with a Palestinian partner. That's what he said when he pulled out of Gaza. Of course they weren't going to be like, oh, wow, actually, you know what? It's a really good idea to start negotiating now because fuck off. Eek.
Of Israel, and he proceeds to offer everything to Abbas. He gives him basically the same offer, but better than the offer that Barak gave in 2000. He offers everything. He offers Judea and Samaria. He says, we're going to keep some of the big Israeli settlements that exist here, but we're going to give you land swaps. You can keep the Gaza Strip, everything. Abbas does not even bother to issue a counteroffer. He just walks away from the table and launches.
Because he can't take the map with him.
Box. You smarmy.
So he can't analyze the land swap, so he draws a napkin accords. Woo, we've done this already a million times. Okay. By this point, the peace process was just treated with total fucking impunity because it couldn't work. How could you negotiate a peace process with Abbas over West Bank and Gaza when Abbas doesn't even control Gaza? When he's not even allowed to go there because Hamas have thrown Fatah members off of fucking buildings. So there was no sincere peace offer in 2008. Sorry.
Launches violence. Gaza war begins 2008. Missiles flying in from Gaza. This is the first Gaza war. Israel has to go in Operation Cast Lead and shut that down. 2014. This breaks out again. Another giant rocket attack from Hamas in Gaza. Israel has to go back in 2014 and shut it down. And that brings us to today, 2021, another Gaza war in which Hamas has decided to launch rockets at the state of Israel. The real reason for that has nothing to do with land disputes in Jerusalem. The real reason has to do with the fact that Mahmoud Abbas was about to hold an election in April. He canceled it because he knew he was going to lose to Hamas. As always, the best way to garner support when it appears that you're about to go down is to start blaming the Jews and start trying to kill them. You can start an arms race between yourself and Hamas on how many Jews they can kill. So that brings us to where we are right now in 2021.
You want me to release my notes, Sia? Yeah, I know, okay? Yeah. At the end, I'll put my Obsidian thing all up, okay? And it'll be the most disorganized horse shit you've ever seen. But, I put references in all my videos. I make it quite easy to find stuff for my claims. I don't know. Like, I can try. Maybe if the editor is a Sigma male or female. I don't know who my editor actually is by gender. But if this editor person throws up sources for things that need sourced in the stream, that would be crazy, chat. Whoa. That'd be a keeper.
Decades ago, private citizens used to be largely that. Private. What changed? The internet. Think about everything.
Oh my God.
VPN.com today.
So Hamas is imagine getting ExpressVPN and not Atlas VPN. Cuck.
Actual terrorist group Fatah, which is the military wing of the Palestinian Authority, is a terrorist group as well, and Islamic Jihad. So you have three terrorist groups running this area.
I mean, at this point, Fatah has not. Am I wrong? In post 2006, or the 2010s, 2020s, are Fatah still like a terror group? Maybe some members are doing shit, but I thought their party line was like non-violence at that point from Abbas. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Right here. And again, Israel has no interest in running those areas. It's the last thing that Israel really wants. It's the reason why Israel has not gone and reinvaded these areas or thrown Hamas out. They don't want.
Wait, why? Why are they expanding settlements then if they want nothing to do with these areas? Why are they expanding settlements to the point? Why are they expanding settlements to the point that it's like impossible to build, like almost impossible to build a state here now? Because so many people would have to come out, would have to move back out. Huh. Damn.
Their soldiers in these particular areas. What Israel has done, because they don't wish to be involved in these full-scale wars, is they've developed the Iron Dome system. So the Iron Dome system is really an incredible piece of technology. Okay, so Hamas has been firing rockets at the center of Israel.
Bro, I need
Israel
these.
is a very, very tiny state. If you were to fire a rocket from the Gaza Strip to Jerusalem, you have about 90 seconds warning before the rocket hits. Tel Aviv, which is up here, if you hit Tel Aviv, that's again a 90-second warning. If you're in Ashdod or Ashkelon, which are down here, you're getting like 15, 30 seconds warning before the rockets hit. So Israel develops this incredible technology called Iron Dome. This is what an Iron Dome battery looks like. You can see that they load up the battery with a bunch of essentially anti-missile missiles. That's what they are. There is an enemy rocket that is fired. Israel has these very precise radar systems that track the rocket launches. Then there's a control system that estimates the impact point where it's going to hit. And then they fire a launcher to intercept the missile. And it doesn't bother defending against rockets that are going to land in the middle of nowhere. They have these batteries that are set up in all of Israel's major cities. Iron Dome is basically a technological miracle. They're hitting a bullet with a bullet. And they're doing so with no time to basically figure out how to do it. It's right now succeeding at about 90% rate, which means, by the way, that Israel gets to be nicer to Hamas than it otherwise would be. Because if all these rockets were actually hitting all the populated areas of Israel, Israel would just eviscerate Hamas. Like any other state, it would have no choice but to go in on the ground and just finish the job, which is why.
That's interesting that he said that, because this is before October 7th. Yeah, the Iron Dome is it's insanely expensive as well, yeah. J-Dam the Whistling Willie. Yeah, I love it. He's such a little hawk boy. He's such a little like a little gun-ho bubba that he's like talking about more about the Iron Dome than he was talking about the Nakba, or more about the Iron Dome than talking about. He missed out the Suez Canal crisis completely, I noticed, because that makes Israel look really bad with the massacres that they committed in fucking Rafah and Khan Yunis. Wow.
Why, if Hezbollah in the north, right, on the northern Lebanese border, decides that it wants to.
That's not a good look. Hezbollah with their salutes, oh no. Their marching is really funny. Where's the Hezbollah marching? In like the green suits. I don't know where you can get the green suits ones, because you don't really see those ones very often, but they do have funny marches. There they are, look at them go! Look at them bouncing away. Damn. Okay, don't get radicalized.
Launch a war against Israel. They have way more ordnance than Hamas does, and so Israel would be forced to go in full scale and just do what it would have to do. Right? Israel is being incredibly pinpointed about the way that it deals with this conflict. It's dropping knock bombs on top of buildings. They're bombs that basically shake the building and say, get out. And then they bomb the building after everybody gets out. They're calling building managers and telling them to leave. We have tape of
just so we know, they have been criticized in the past for this, for knock bombs basically being quite ineffective. That's why they don't use them that much anymore. Because a warning actually has to be seen functionally as a warning. Whereas roof knocking... Yeah, this is from the 2008 war. The mission is doubtful. This is from the ICRC, like a casebook. The mission is doubtful whether roof knocking should be understood as a warning as such. In the context of a large-scale military operation, including aerial attacks, civilians cannot be expected to know whether a small explosion is a warning of an impending attack or part of an actual attack. In relation to the incident at the Sawafiri house recounted above, the mission cannot say for certain if this missile was meant to warn or kill. It notes that if this was meant as a warning shot, it is to be deemed reckless in the extreme. The legal requirement is for an effective warning to be given. This means that it should not require civilians to guess the meaning of the warning. The technique of using small explosives to frighten civilians into evacuation, even if the intent is to warn, may cause terror and confuse the affected civilians. It's just like, it's almost like for PR, right? It's just to tell the international community, hey, we roof knock. It's fine.
Them telling building managers, clear the building, and the building managers being like, well, we don't want to. And the Israelis saying, well, yeah, but there are kids inside. And the building manager being like, okay, well, if you kill kids, then it's a good propaganda win for us. It's unbelievable. And yet somehow the world sees some sort of moral equivalence there. Now, there are some international political implications that have changed in the recent...
If you hear an explosion in the proximity, shouldn't you evacuate anyway? Yeah, but to where? Because the problem with Gaza is like you don't really know exactly where's safe. Yeah.
Past with regard to Israel. I've dealt with just specifically here the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But one of the things that has happened that is really quite massive is that if you go back there, Israel currently has a cold peace with Egypt. Israel has kind of a cold peace with Jordan. And because the Obama administration really has strengthened Iran, the three no's of Khartoum, which you'll remember were no peace, no recognition, no negotiation, they've...
What about the phone messages? Are they fake news? Yeah, they are. I've heard that. So phone messages and leaflets have been criticized if their warnings are not clear enough. But if they are, then yeah, that would give the call, I'd imagine. But I don't know. I don't know how effective they are because they might just like... I've heard that the leaflets in 2008 were just not clear. That people didn't know where to go or how long they had or anything like that. Yeah.
Completely disappeared for a wide variety of Arab states, which have decided, guess what? The Jews aren't our enemy. Iran is our enemy. And so this is how you ended up with the Abraham Accords, where the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco, all of which have been supportive of these various wars of extinction against the Jewish state, have now decided that they're going to form a quite warm peace with Israel and recognize Israel's existence. That fundamentally changed the math on the ground. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is trying to walk that back by attempting to provide support to the radicalized Palestinian government of Fatah or of the Hamas or of Islamic Jihad. Alrighty, so let's talk about what exactly happened in the last couple of months.
What's the point in the warning? Can't the target of the bomb notice the warning and leave before the bomb hits? It's not about targeting individuals like Hamas people. It's about targeting infrastructure generally. So if the Hamas have like a rocket launch pad or a stockpile or like a communication system, like any kind of military infrastructure in a building, they can't move all that out in any quick time. That's what it's, yeah. It's mostly for that kind of thing. Yeah, I know. You sometimes get this like caricatured image of they're warning the civilians and then Hamas is just standing next to them and they're like, oh, I'll just go too. Yeah, no, it's not like that.
Resulted in this round of new violence. Why don't we begin with the Abraham Accords? The Abraham Accords were this monumental shift in how people thought about the Middle East. So for decades,
I don't know anything about these. I'm sorry. I'll just let him propagandize and you guys can say it's fake or it might not be. Who knows?
Conventional wisdom is there will not be peace between Israel and all these surrounding Arab states. It's the reason they call it the Israeli-Arab conflict as opposed to Israel versus the Palestinians, because it was supposed to implicate all of these various countries because of the three no's of Khartoum. Right? The idea was that until Israel made some sort of deal with the Palestinians, there would never be peace in the region, ever. No one could ever recognize the presence of Israel until Israel made concessions to the Palestinians. And so under that impression, Israel kept being like, okay, we'll make this concession and this concession and this concession. And the Palestinians kept being like, well, okay, we'll take those concessions, and also we're not going to do any of the things that you want us to do. So this was completely exploded by the Trump administration and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and mostly, ironically, by Barack Obama. So during the Obama administration, there was a real shift in how the United States treated Iran. So Iran has been threatening Israeli extinction since the Iranian Revolution of ~79. They've constantly been shouting death to the Jews, death to America.
Yeah, I don't want to go over this bit because I don't know shit about the Iran deal.
This would be a real politique situation in which Iran, to get those, there would be this sort of balance of power between the Sunni and the Shia in the Middle East, and this would solve all problems. This was Barack Mullah's. So the Iranians continue in secret to foster their nuclear development. The Iranians take all the money that the United States is now allowing Iran. The tip of Saudi Arabia is Yemen. And so back terrorists had basically under Barack moved towards...
This is all anti-Obama shit.
The Jews just want to live there. And what would be these sort of proxy states, including the UAE and Bahrain, and our enemy is the Iranians. To the point where even during the Obama administration, a regime that had been Muslim Brotherhood with Israel
what
on
come
the thing that
next?
they like. Okay, so we can see these burgeoning ties between Israel and these Arab countries. The Palestinian issue is a completely different issue. It's completely
What's Moshe
separate.
Dayan doing
so
here?
instead, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make very clear.
Let's go.
Since 2006, Mahmoud Abbas was last elected in 2005. He
Yeah.
is now in the 16th year of a 4-year term.
Yeah.
So when people talk about Israel as undemocratic and apartheid, 20% of Israel is Arab. There are Arabs who sit on the Supreme Court. There's a major Arab party called Ra'am, which is part of the Israeli Knesset. It's just a lie.
But they also manage a military occupation. I'm sorry, fuck off.
Israel is an apartheid state. The true apartheid state is the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. 0 Jews live there, and they've not held an election in any of these areas for nearly 2 decades. So Abbas, in an attempt to appease the Biden administration.
Wait, why does he think West Bank is apartheid? Does he think the PA were the ones who put up the separation wall? Or the checkpoints, or the different road systems, or the different work permit systems? Is that did the PA responsible for that? Bro, if you just said that, you just basically described why people call it an apartheid state because of the treatment in the West Bank. Was he just willing to describe that system as apartheid because he thinks the PA is in charge of it? Most of the West Bank is still under Israeli control. That system that you would describe as apartheid is managed and implemented by Israel. Bro, Ben just accused Israel of apartheid. Accidentally.
And the incoming Democratic power base in the United States and the international community. He wants to show that he's legit. We're going to hold an election, says Mahmoud Abbas, who's I believe, 80 years old. It turns out nobody likes Mahmoud Abbas.
Yep.
So Hamas looked like it was about to take over not just the Gaza Strip, but also the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And so, like a couple of weeks before the election, Abbas was like, you know what? Bad idea, no elections. And knowing that this is going to set off a conflagration, Abbas starts pushing violence against Israel. The Fatah, who control all television in the West Bank, they start putting out videos about how it's good if you can kill a Jew. They start really ramping up a lot of the anti-Israel rhetoric. There are a bunch of incidents in which TikTok videos are taken of Palestinian youths in Jerusalem beating up Jews, and these are being celebrated. So there are a couple of pretexts that are used in order to redirect from I'm canceling the election to
I don't think it's ever Abbas that signs off on these messages, isn't it? But it's like Fatah are kind of a little bit fragmented. So yeah, I mean, there's that PA letter, that letter that Fatah put out during this war as well. That really fucking hateful screed that they put out. Eek.
it's all the Israelis' fault.
What Abbas does now is he says anti-Semitic shit. He does anti-Semitic rambling, is what he does. That's his rhetorical contribution to the movement.
So in it's all the Israelis' fault category, there are particularly 2 issues that they've been pushing. One is that the Palestinians were barred from entry via the Damascus Gate, which is a gate into Jerusalem, entry to the Temple Mount. Now, there were some roadblocks placed there because Israel was afraid that people were going to congregate and riot, which they promptly did as soon as Israel removed the roadblocks. So Israel removed the roadblocks, people congregated, they rioted, they did violence. Okay, this was used as a pretext to say that Israel was restricting access to the Temple Mount. I've been to the Temple Mount. Muslims have full and free reign over the Temple Mount. The Islamic Waqf controls the Temple Mount. They have since 1967. Israel won back all of the old city of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. And Moshe Dayan, who was the general of the Israeli army at the time, he handed over the keys to the Temple Mount to the Islamic Waqf. And so Jews are not allowed to pray openly on the Temple Mount right now, which is insane. The Muslims complained that, on the one hand, worship wasn't being allowed there. Not true. 100% not true.
It's funny that that's insane, but the fact that Israel annexes East Jerusalem is not insane. Yeah.
During the middle of this,
it's almost as if because his entire core principle here is that Jews have an innate, an immutable right to that land, regardless of who lives there now, and regardless of who has to get fucked off for that to happen.
Chaos, by the way, 100,000 Muslims went up there during Ramadan, at the end of Ramadan, to pray on the Temple Mount. Doesn't sound like very good restriction of religious rights there. Okay, so a bunch of Fatah and Hamas members take over Al-Aqsa Mosque. They bring in rocks from the surrounding area. They bring in projectiles. They start throwing them at police. They put Hamas flags on the top of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's a terrorist group, a genocidal terrorist group. They start attacking the Israeli police. When the Israeli police go and shut it down, then they say, oh, Israel is being aggressive in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's why we need to start firing missiles. Okay, that is reason number 1. It's a pretext and it's a lie. Reason number two is this long-standing legal dispute over an area of Jerusalem known as Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah is sort of an outskirt of Jerusalem. It's a little suburb. It's known by Jews as Shimon HaTzadik. It's known by Arabs as Sheikh Jarrah. Okay, so in the 1870s, there were a bunch of Jews who arrived in this area of Jerusalem, and they bought up a bunch of plots of land in Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik, he's a Talmudic era sage, and so his grave is supposed to be there. So Jews bought a lot of the territory that are right around. They have all the legal land bills and all of that. Heavy Jewish population in Sheikh Jarrah up until the 1948 war. The 1948 war happens, and as mentioned, Jordan takes over this entire arena.
With, after cooperating with Israel, yeah.
Including the old city of Jerusalem. And they proceed to put barbed wire there, and Jews aren't allowed in, no freedom of worship, the whole deal. During that time...
Is he going to say it's okay to reclaim land that you lost with a land title from the 1800s? Is that really the line Ben's going to go down? I haven't heard this part of the video before. I've recognized other parts, but this bit is new. Would he really say that? Would he really say that if you have an old document, even if it goes back to the 1800s, that you can just kick off whoever lives there now? Like these guys? I think a lot of these land documents are from the fucking, from the Ottoman Empire. Ben? Ben? Does that mean the keys are valid as well? He's using the same argument as yeah. Damn, Ben.
Jordanian government hands over to some people in Sheikh Jarrah legal title to those homes. So say, we took this over, here's a title, you own the home now. Some people, they didn't give legal title. For whatever reason, it got caught up in the bureaucracy, or these people they didn't particularly like. For whatever reason, they don't have the legal title to those homes. Israel in the 67 war wins back Sheikh Jarrah, Shimon HaTzadik, and all the people who had the legal title, they're like, okay, well, I guess you live there now. All the people who didn't have legal title, the people who were the previous landowners came with the legal title, and they said, okay, this is our land, we want our house back. And the Israeli courts came up with a solution. Okay. And their solution was, you can continue to live in the house, but you have to pay rent to the people who own the legal title, which frankly is not a bad solution. For 50 years...
Ben! How many villages in historic Palestine were built directly over? It's quite a few, the red ones. Does that mean that if a Palestinian who can produce a document from fucking Khalid, that they should pay rent to the refugee? Because again, a lot of these Palestinians, thanks to the UN and also just because they hold on to them, a lot of people have held on to these documents for a very long time. We have lots of records of these things. Ben, he's just but again, of course, because his consistency isn't actually anything, there's no logic behind any of this, other than Jews have the right to the land and like Muslims and Arab Palestinians don't. That's it. Damn, that's a lot of rent that's owed to these people, because they can just turn up with their little Ottoman Empire documents. Apparently that's fine. You can stay, just pay us rent. Ben. Man, Sheikh Jarrah is really Sheikh Jarrah literally just destroys any maximalist argument. It completely fucks with the absolutist right of return people from the pro-Palestinian side, like all the commies and shit, because they think those Ottoman land documents and those keys are just like gospel. But then if you apply that, then it would mean that Jews taking back property from East Jerusalem is actually fine. And even they could probably do it in Hebron as well, or in Gaza, because of the evictions after the British Mandate. But that fucks with them, because it's like, they don't like that logic being applied to the other side. And the same thing with Ben Shapiro, saying it's like Sheikh Jarrah is okay, so if people from 1948 and their descendants can come back with land documents, then they're fair game to demand rent. Bro. It's actually a pretty fair solution when you think about it.
Palestinians who are living there don't pay rent for 50 years. So the heirs and assigns of these particular land titles decide, you know what? We actually would like to knock down these 4 houses, and we want to build an apartment complex there. This is what this whole thing is about, supposedly, which it isn't. It's just a normal real estate dispute over eviction and terms of rent and all of this. And an Israeli court finds, okay, well, they haven't paid rent, so they're going to be evicted.
Normal. It's normal, is it? I would love to ask him why he thinks this doesn't apply the other way. I would love to ask him that. Oh my God. Ben!
This is held up, right? The Israeli government says we're not going to implement this right now. We want this to go all the way to the Supreme Court. It'll be adjudicated there. This is used as a pretext by the Palestinians to riot. It is used as a pretext by Hamas to fire rockets into the area. And the suggestion is this is Israel being aggressive and engaging in ethnic cleansing, which is weird because there are plenty of Arab families living in Sheikh Jarrah who are not being evicted because either A, they paid their rent, or B, they actually had the legal land titles to the homes in which they were living. East Jerusalem is still extremely heavily Arab. For a country that's being accused of ethnic cleansing, Israel is markedly incompetent at ethnic cleansing, considering that the population of Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Jerusalem has vastly and exponentially increased over the course of the last 50-odd years. Those are the pretexts for the conflict. The actual reason for the conflict is Abbas canceled the elections, he ramped up the violence, and Hamas, in competition, said, okay, well, if Fatah's going to ramp up the violence, we can't be left out, man. A party's a party. And so they start firing rockets into Israel at civilian centers. Now, Hamas does, because they're a terrorist group, is they put all of their rockets in civilian areas to try and stop Israel from attacking them, because they know that Israel actually cares about civilians, whereas they do not. A lot of the foreign aid that was being granted and given to Hamas was not being used for actual aid. It was not being used for electricity or water. Israel's been providing electricity and water to the Gaza Strip for free for years. Hamas didn't use any of this money to actually build up infrastructure or help people. They used it to build these giant terror tunnels and stock up on rockets. These rockets, by the way, being provided by the same Iranian government that the American government is currently attempting to negotiate with under Joe Biden, which makes no sense at all. It's also the reason why, by the way, why 200 Democrats just voted last week that they would not place sanctions on any company that was doing business with Hamas or donating money to Hamas. There's a bill in 2019, identical bill, said cut off funding to any company that does business with Hamas. It passed unanimously in the House. Now that Joe Biden is president and trying to negotiate with Iran, 200 Democrats voted it down and never saw the light of day.
He's saying the PA pays for the electricity and water to Gaza. Hang on. Oh, yeah. The Hamas government in Gaza has been reliant on the PA to help provide electricity in Gaza, with import duties on Gaza's fuel purchased via Israel being collected by Israel. The PA pays the bills to Israel and Egypt for the electricity that supplies it. Okay. Another little lie there, Benny boy. Damn. Ben lying.
In the House of Representatives. That is where things currently stand. Israel is attempting to do what it can to wipe out Hamas's capacity to fire rockets indiscriminately at its civilian population without having to actually do a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip, because frankly, there are no good solutions there. If Israel goes in and wipes out Hamas, then maybe Islamic Jihad takes over, maybe Fatah takes over, maybe the next level of Hamas takes over. The only thing that
Has Ben Shapiro signed off on the... Has Ben Shapiro rejected the ground invasion? I thought he supported it. He's saying it wouldn't be a good idea. 2 years ago. Is he opposing the ground invasion here? Because I guess that what he just said there, like he had a reason for it. It was like a rational reason to oppose the ground invasion. I guess this is because October 7th has turned him into a post 9/11 Ben, and now he's not being rational anymore. I wonder. Damn, that's interesting. It's very illuminating. Unless he opposes the ground invasion, but I think that's very unlikely. His Twitter is just a bunch of soy. I can't really, yeah. I don't know. I'd be very surprised if he's opposing this ground invasion. I don't think I've ever heard ceasefire from Ben Shapiro. So, oh well, okay.
that has actually guaranteed peace in the region at all for any prolonged period of time was, in fact, Israeli troops on the ground staffing these areas, but Israel doesn't want to be there. And so the two alternatives historically have been Israel has to subject itself every few years to a barrage of rocket attacks, go in, knock out some infrastructure. You get a couple of years of peace. Same thing happens in a couple of years. Or you have to have a long-term, quote-unquote, occupation in which Israel basically attempts to pacify by keeping a certain baseline level of troops in a particular area. So, as you see, it took a very long time just for me to go through the basic history of this conflict, and that's the very basic history of this conflict. There's a lot more there. There are a lot of resources out there, but suffice it to say, the media members who try to boil this down to just a border dispute or try to suggest that this is just a matter of Benjamin Netanyahu, it's coming from ignorance and it's coming from stupidity.
Yeah.
Do your reading before you bother to comment on the situation. One of the things that you will have noted in the news is that every time there's an uptick.
That's good advice. I guess it depends what you read. Read the Bible to find out where the Jews came coming in from Egypt up to Israel.
In the violence in this
Jew you're
particular
reading.
region that involves
Nice
Israel,
one. Well
there's
done.
widespread anti-Semitic attacks that happen all over the world. You're seeing it happen right now, every place from LA to New York to Europe. And there's this argument that's constantly made by people, particularly on the left. Well, if Israel didn't exist, wouldn't there be less anti-Semitism? Well, first of all, as we've talked about, you'd have to ignore every bit of history from 136 CE all the way to 1948 to get to that point. There's something quite ironic about somebody beating a Jew in the street over Israel saying, if Israel didn't exist, I would stop beating this Jew. The reality is that not every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, of course, just like not every criticism of the United States is anti-American. But
Hey,
every anti-Semite is anti-Israel. Every single one. And there's a heavy crossover between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism for sure.
I don't even know if that explains the Christians, right? Like Glenn Beck was massively pro-Israel, but he was kicked off Fox News for anti-Semitism. But okay, almost forgot about just one of the biggest, baddest voting blocks in the United States. But okay, oh well, what a good video! Wow, excellent. He lies a lot more than he needs to, I think. If you want to be a propagandist, I've said this before, you can collect a pretty strong collection of facts for one side and just tell those and be factually correct for all of it. Like, even for the 48 partition, you can just say, like, you can just say the 47 partition, you can just say the Jews accepted it, the Arabs said no. That's it. You don't need to just don't explain why the Arabs would have had a right to say no. For the 48 war, you can just say, people say they were ethnically cleansed. People say that it was the Israelis' fault that they left. Actually, it was the war's fault. Like, yeah, okay, woo. Yeah, I guess it was, you know, because the war, because even Ben Gurion and all that said that they wouldn't do, that a war would be like the right venue to do a displacement. So yeah, just blame the war. You could do that. You can be technically true and still propagandize to fuck, but I guess the whole point of propaganda is being lazy and like efficient, you know? Pumping out the content quickly. But yeah, like oh god, the Sheikh Jarrah question. I would love to ask that question. Oh god. That's okay. We just need to build. We'll get to him eventually. Ben. Okay. Good segment, guys. Well done. Propaganda works better in falsehoods, so there's a lot of it. I wonder why that is. I wonder why propagandists like need to lie always, even though the way I imagine it in my head, propaganda doesn't necessarily need to be false at all. But I don't know. That must have been painful. I guess so. You get used to it, you know? All right, nice one.